So thank you for your attention. As far as lecture one was concerned, your questions testify to an exquisite attention, and I'm very grateful. Now, with lecture two, we would like to look at two women writers, poet critics, and their theory of the text. We are walking more and more toward the center of our discipline, literary studies, and I want to look at one of the key terms that we operate with, and that is the idea of the text. Now, the two women writers in question will be a modernist writer, H.D., and a contemporary writer, Adrienne Rich. In fact, the subtitle of the lecture is What is the Text? Now, let me recap what we achieved in lecture one. So we talked about the central activity in literary studies, that is criticism, and we talked about its transformations, desirable transformation into critique, that is critical practice, a form of critical practice. But what is critical practice if not reading? Its basis, its substance is reading, and reading as an activity presupposes the notion of the text. So this lecture will cover the evolution of the term text in general terms, and in the second part we'll look at the contribution of H.D. and Adrienne Rich, contribution to the question, what is the text? In fact, we can encounter theories of the text in essays, right, in theoretical essays, but we can also encounter, I think you will agree with me, notions, theories of the text in poetic texts. Well, in fact, H.D. and Adrienne Rich have in common the fact that they were both poets and also critics. They were creative writers, but they also wrote commentaries to literature. But in fact, more than commentaries, they wrote about theory of literature. So I will draw on them. Now, the evolution of the term text. Now, I think we can say that, like the other term, writing, in the 20th century, the term text has gone through an explosion of its meaning. In fact, from the 1960s on, it has expanded. It has expanded enormously. The meaning of text has expanded, just as the meaning of writing has expanded. There's been an explosion of meaning of the meaning of the term, and an expansion of the concept of text. So the word text has, from the 60s on, replaced the term work to refer to a literary work. The term text has also subsumed the written or printed word as such in its manifold forms. It has been applied to everything written. As of the 1980s, the term has extended further to comprise all sorts of cultural objects, any cultural object. And then textuality together with text has been used to refer to a property, not just of the written word, but also of human life and, the social order. So that the world, people have spoken of the world as text, or the textuality of our lives, the textuality of the world. Now, for this overview, I referred to a useful article by Adrienne Wilson, a historian of science in the first place, what is text included in the bibliography. But I would add, and to expand on this evolution, I would add that there are two key moments we can single out when the notion of text, transformed. Roland Barthes and Jacques Derrida being the representative names for those two moments. Roland Barthes, both French, but one a critic, the other a philosopher, though, as you probably know, has been very influential in shaping literary studies, especially in the Anglophone world. Now, why Roland Barthes? Well, in a 1967 essay, the death of the author, Barthes began by defining the text. Let me read and then comment on his language, because it will have some surprises for us. A text consists not of a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author, God. There is no end to it, no bottom. Writing constantly posits meaning, but always in order to evaporate it. Writing seeks a systematic exemption of meaning. Thereby, literature, by refusing to assign to the text and to the world as text a secret, i.e., an ultimate meaning, liberates an activity we may call counter-theological, properly revolutionary. For to refuse to hold meaning is finally to refuse God. Needless to say, you are struck by the anti-theological thrust of this passage. You notice that to reclaim the freedom of meaning, Roland Barthes employs an explicitly anti-theological idiom. A single meaning is equated to a single theological message. He speaks of the author God. He speaks of refusing God in the search for meaning. It's quite strong, quite striking. The text is made into a banner. First of all, let me recap what we hear. The sense of liberation, but the sense of liberation can be rendered only insofar as an anti-theological language idiom is employed. What Barthes wants to project is this idea of stepping into. We spoke of attitude in the lecture one. Here we speak of stepping into an unconfined space, reclaiming the freedom of meaning. So to refuse to hold meaning. But in another essay from Work to Text, 1971, Barthes turns the text as a term and as a concept into a banner. The banner of a wider change, a wider epistemological transformation. The tip of the iceberg, so to speak, of an epistemological slide. Instead of the word transformation, it speaks of slide, to give you the idea of a gradual transformation, of course, at the end of different forces. These forces are Marxism, Freudianism, and structuralism. Their action combined for Barthes has caused an epistemological earthquake, a slide, a change. It has allowed for the overturning, the refusal, the repudiation, the overturning of former categories. And it has, he says, allowed us today to vary, to exceed, to repudiate. Notice the vocabulary. Vary has to do with difference, but it is placed next to, on a par with, excess and rebellion, repudiation more than rebellion. And no. Now, the text for Barth is essentially amounts to the repudiation of a first principle. I mean, I will not read the entire sentences for you. As I said, you will always have the notes in the PowerPoint to reflect on in the solitude of your rooms or in groups after the lectures. But let me point out a few ideas here. There are 7 propositions in from work to text, which is a sort of manifesto of this new idea of the text. The text is it's a methodological field. It's a field, something like it cuts across several works. Remember Benjamin's plane. It cannot be contained in a hierarchy. It's subversive. It's the deferment of the signified. One never arrives at the meaning. It's plural. It's an explosion, a dissemination, a scattering of many meanings in a way. It's it does not obey the law. A law it does not obey a father without the inscription of the father. It is not something inscribed with uh, the father principle, whether it is a psychoanalytic principle, whether it is a religious principle, whether it is a social, patriarchal principle. It has nothing to do with the father. And it is unreadable. Unreadability here is charged with a positive, desirable meaning. And it is a space. So notice field, space, no hierarchy, no principle, no first principles. So essentially, Barth, this is the text according to Barth. You hear the effort to theorize. This is not a concrete object. It's to theorize a space of freedom. But this theory is deeply dependent upon this anti-theological, this rebellious, this adversarial, strong adversarial rejection of things. Jacques Derrida, somehow following up on Barth, although they are 2 different thinkers, he tries to posit the text as a space, so wider space. If let me quote him directly: if we are to approach a text, it must have an edge. So normally, when we think of a text or work, we think of something that begins and ends. It has an edge. The question of the text, as it has been elaborated and transformed in the last dozen or so years, has not merely touched on all those boundaries that form the running border of what used to be called a text. But the text is not just the old-fashioned work that has a beginning and an end, but it has many other borders. The text exists in society, exists among a group of people, exists within the circulation of ideas, etc., etc. There are many boundaries and borders that have not been, Derrida argues, examined. And what we once thought this word could identify, i.e., the supposed end and beginning of a work. This is the old-fashioned way of looking at a text. Now, what has happened, if it has happened, is a sort of, notice if it has happened, because Derrida, like Foucault, just as Foucault had done as he was tracing the critical attitude, is tracing a phenomenon that he finds difficult to articulate, but knows that it exists. So he needs to profile a phenomenon that does not have secure historical concrete anchoring points, but it's in the air, it's a climate, it's a sensibility, it's an atmosphere. What has happened is a sort of overrun, and I'm interested in the word overrun, excess, overrun, going overboard, that spoils all these boundaries. Crossing of boundaries that spoils the authority of every boundary and forces us to extend, that is, to enlarge, to stretch the accredited concept, that is, the concept of the text. Mind you, Derrida had already done this extension, practiced this extension with the notion of writing. he now does it with the text, the dominant notion of a text, or what I still call a text, for strategic reasons in part. In other words, for strategic reasons, because the present requires it, so to speak. That's how I'm reading the strategic reasons. Now, so the text is compared to an overrun, to a crossing of boundaries, to an excess, the feeling of stepping into, the sense, the sensation of stepping into a larger space that has no edge, a liberation from the limited sense of the transnational meaning. In fact, the search for the meaning of a text is cut off from the idea of communication. It's independent of any one specific communicative situation. Remember that Barthes had celebrated the unreadability, that is the autonomy. Remember that taciturn autonomous objects, literary works on Benjamin's plane of neighborliness. So it's the text is beyond borders. It's a position, a posture of the critic beyond borders. It's the sense of an exit in unconfined space. Now, there are limits, of course, to this view of the text. This view jointly offered by Barthes and by Derrida. For reasons of time, instead of pointing to those limits now, I will skip 3 slides and offer now the view that HD and Rich have of the text. And then, given time, we'll return to the limits, or we can return to the limits during the tutorial. So allow me to. So text is stepping in unlimited space, overrun. Now, what do HD and Adrienne Rich contribute to this critical tradition whereby the text changes, transforms? HD, modernist, Rich, contemporary. Why are they included in the same space, I should say? Because Adrienne Rich was deeply influenced by HD. And that influence, we will hear that influence somehow in the poetry, but it is a very exciting topic for research. So I wish to begin with reading poem number 4 in HD's The Walls Do Not Fall. It's the first part of a longer trilogy, and this part was The Walls Do Not Fall was written in 1944, so during World War II. It was written as London was destroyed by the bombings. So it was written at a time of profound destruction and collective pain. Let me read for you first, and then present HD's first of all propose that this poem contains in itself a theory of the text. Secondly, propose that the theory of the text contained here is a response. It's an alternative. It's an alternative to what Derrida and Barthes proposes. Though I don't want to pit at all Barthes and Derrida versus the two women writers. Just want to hear the alternative and expand on it. And also address the problem of to what extent does HD and Adrienne Rich's alternative point to the limits of Barthes and Derrida's notion of the text. There is a spell, for instance, in every seashell. Continues, the sea frost is powerless against coral. Bone, stone, marble, hewn from within by the craftsman, the shellfish, oyster, clam, mollusk, is master mason planning the stone marvel. Yet that flabby amorphous hermit within, like the planet, senses the finite and limits its orbit of being, its house, temple, fane, shrine. It unlocks the portals as stated, should be intervals, prompted by hunger. It opens to the tide flow, but infinity, no, of nothing too much. I sense my own limit. My shell jaws snap shut at invasion of the limitless. Ocean weight, infinite water cannot crack me. Egg in eggshell, closed in, complete, immortal, full circle. I know the pull of the tide, the love as well as the moon, the octopus darkness is powerless against her cold immortality. So I, in my own way, know that the whale cannot digest me. Be firm in your own small, static, limited orbit, and the sharp jaws of outer circumstance will spit you forth. Be indigestible, hard, ungiving, so that, living within, you beget self out of self, selfless, that pearl of great price. I mean, there are wonderful recordings online of this poem, and I hope after our event you will want to listen to them. In any way, readers of HD have already singled out section 4, poem 4, of The Walls Do Not Fall as a kind of theory of the literary work. Susan Gubar, for example, has stressed the constructive power of the mollusk, who transforms living substance into a formal object, the pearl of great price at the end. But if this is a scene about the crafting of the object, with a mind, an eye that interrogates herself about the crafting along the way, it is worth noticing, I would argue, that much as in that we get a creature withdrawing, the self as this creature withdrawing. And of course, HD is playing with the boundary between the human self and the creaturely self. The vulnerable, it's a vulnerable creature. The protagonist here is a mollusk, a technician, a craftsman, okay, braving natural forces through withdrawal, the withdrawal, and through a consciousness of limits. So HD's mollusks displays the capacity to withdraw from invasion of the limitless. So we heard the text about the text as a limitless space, this desire to step into a limitless space. Here is with Suzanne Goubard, we read this poem as a theory of the text, as old a theory of the text. We hear almost something else, the consciousness of limits and the withdrawal from an invasion of limitlessness. There is also an added feature. There is a plunge via the strategic employment of the mollusk, of the creature. Here, HD stages a plunge into formlessness and the necessity of form. A plunge into formlessness, the power of nature that threatens to destroy, but also the necessity of form, the pearl of great price, that stands for the shapely object crafted with perfection at the end of the labor of the craftsman. So in the phrase, this tension between the formlessness, or rather HD's keenness on making us see that the text hovers between formlessness and form. This can also be gleaned in her the language she uses, and more specifically in the way she aligns words. In the phrase, the flabby amorphous hermit within the enjambed, this is an enjambed line, whereby we are sort of forced to pause, our breath, is asked to pause, but the sense, the meaning of the sentence of the language is continuous. There's a tension between formlessness and form. The flabby amorphous hermit within, the word within conjures the inside of the shell, going down in a solitude that is indigestible, hard, ungiving, without form. And the flabby amorphous hermit. So that's why I talk of a creaturely slide, this descent. Whereas Barthes had spoken about an epistemological slide, here I would talk about a creaturely slide, a descent, a movement downward, also evoked graphically, notice, by the thin lines and the thin stanzas. These are couplets, stanzas made of couplets, the thin lines. And this thinness is accompanied by, and this movement signaling, accompanying us in a movement downward, is also accompanied by a movement outward, an expansion, and by an inward contraction that is strange and fascinating. Like a planet, it's a movement outward, like a planet. The poem flies outward, and then gathers itself again in a domestic space, a space of prayer. It's house, temple, fane, shrine. It's such a dynamic pull in outward, inside. It is worth considering what kind of labor, given this kind of dynamism and contrasting movements, it's worth considering what kind of labor with form, the pearl of great price that we get, and in the end suggest. What does the pearl of great price suggest? But first of all, there is a there is a biblical echo. Yes, there is both a literary, in the sense that pearl refers to one of the earliest English poems in English. There is also a strong biblical echo in Matthew 13, a merchant in search of the pearl of great price. But the craft of the mollusk technician, and the mollusk, the mask for the poet herself, is a technician. It is, form, technique, form, making counts. The craft of the technician is aimed at the production of this pearl of great price, which Susan Gubar, takes to be a metaphor for HD's poetry, especially for earlier imagistic poetry, a poetry that is based on a certain economy of words, no wordness, an economy of vocabulary, striking images, economy, striking images. So, yes, aimed at the production of the pearl of great price, the labor of the mollusk. Yet the ambiguous reference to the pearl, as I said, there is it's both a literary reference, it's a biblical reference, then Susan Gubar takes it to be a reference to HD's own poetry. This ambiguity alludes to something beyond the figurative labor of form, beyond what the poet does to create a poem. The self-enclosed non-referential completeness. Gubar speaks of a self-enclosed non-referential completeness. Remember Benjamin's taciturn objects of the pearl as work of art, points to a reserve, to something uncountable, as if the work of art, the core, the spirit, the inner core of the work of art were in fact something uncountable. Remember Benjamin saying the truth of a work is inevitably, intimately, and inconspicuously tied up with its concrete details. In a way, we hear something similar in Gubar's reading of HD. This uncountable, this uncontrollable element in the creating of form. So to recap, the theory of the text according to HD, there is a constructive power foregrounded, not an not a debunking power, constructing power, the power to transform, living substance into a formal object. Mollusk is a technician, braving natural forces to withdraw. There is a consciousness of limits. There's a simultaneous plunge into formlessness and the necessity of form. Amorphous and like a planet, it's an expansive sense of form. Then there's a going down in a solitude without form and darkness, an amorphous darkness, the amorphous solitude, darkness of the hermit. There's a movement outward and a movement that gathers itself in a domestic spiritual setting. Now, let's move to Adrienne Rich. Now, I'm not going to be able to read the entire poem, but I would like to read the first part of diving into the wreck. Rich builds on HD's imagistic, craft, the economical language, striking images that you saw in action also in poem 4, although it was HD's earlier practice from 1919 on. Rich builds on HD's imagistic craft, not only because her lucid, concise verse recalls the predecessor's economical, thin verse, but because it steers downward more explicitly, that is, as if creating the text, giving form is a descent, a movement downward. And in fact, Rich steers her verse downward more explicitly, and flexes it to a concrete, flexes her poem to the concrete image of a descent. As in HD, the poetic lines form a column that looks like a ladder, but this time the ladder is explicitly named. Allow me to read. Just having read the book on myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I'm having to do this not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. There is a letter. The letter is always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it is for, we who have used it. It is a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, run after run, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down, my flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. First, the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I am blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. Notice how by and by, gradually, Rich gets rid of punctuation. Notice how she plays on the enjambed lines, that is, lines when she forces us to take a breath and therefore to reflect on what is happening. And yet there is this contrast between the reckless, the armed, the deliberate dive of the protagonist here and the pace of our reading. Our pace is slower. The agitation of the eye exceeds the pace of our reading. So what is happening here? The withdrawal resolves into a descent. We had a creature withdrawing, in H.D.'s staging of the theory of the text, a theory of the aesthetic artifact. We had a creature withdrawing. Here, the withdrawal modulates into a deliberate descent, rung after rung. I go down, rung after rung, the repetition of the I go down, rung after rung. An HD's amorphous creature reappears at first as a human body of no distant gender, withdrawn in a body armor, the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers. Then, as an insect-like living, crawling down into the deep element. Importantly, it's a descent, descending toward a site of destruction. In fact, in the second part of diving into the wreck, the diver finally reaches the site of lost lives, of destruction. This fact brings out more explicitly the element of historical violence that was in the background of H.D.'s poem 4. But here, historical, it's not just a specific moment in history, but it's history, history reduced to a general canvas. Violence the violence that has remained in the background of HD reemerges in Adrienne Rich's. In fact, we get allow me to skip to the second part, the drowned face always staring toward the sun, the evidence of damage. By the time the diver gets to the wreck and not the story of the wreck, the thing itself and not the myth, the drawn face always staring toward the sun, the evidence of damage worn by salt and sway into this threadbare beauty, the ribs of the disaster curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. Let me go back. So, as in HD before her, Rich's descending is never too far from a theory of the text, however. Notice that the term book, okay, the diving into the wreck, opens with the phrase, the book of myths, and ends with the phrase, a book of myths. Now, the different article is important. The book of myths, the diver takes initiative and decides to explore the wreck to do justice to all those to damage lives. By the end, she wonders. The diver wonders about being left with the tools of the descent, the knife, an instrument of defense, okay, and the camera, instrument of documentation. She wonders again being left with those instruments and a book of myths in which our names do not appear. And the problem raised in between the lines here is, okay, is enlarging the book, writing a book of myths, rewriting the book of myths to include all the names who do not appear. Is that enough? That's the question that hovers in the background. But let's say a few more words about this descent. It's a descent toward damaged human lives. Let's recap so far and then move on to the second part. Diving into the wreck is a descent rung after rung, and it's a movement downward. Richest creature is a human body of no distinct gender, withdrawn in a body armor. A body armor could be anyone. I am he, I am she. It's insect-like at a certain point, so blurs even the boundaries of the human, crawling down into the deep element. It's a meaningful descent where meaningful means transformation, means leaving behind a certain climate, a certain environment. The sea is not a question of power. Leaving behind a structure, a configuration, an organization of the mind, a certain configuration of society, leaving behind a way of thinking. This is the place, okay, and I am here. The ending, as I said, is important. The poem ends with a book. It's not the book, the imposed common book, but a book, possibly a book rewritten after the descent, but in fact it transitions from the book of myths of the opening to a book of myths, and the shift that interrogates and this shift interrogates precisely the crafting of the book, of the text. The crafting of the text and the purposes of the crafting. The indefinite article projects a book to be written in which to include names. But as I said before, the question that is left outside of the frame, so to speak, but for us to raise is, would another book of myths be enough? So diving into the wreck is a fragile thing, fragile, held together by a monometric rhythm. I put on, otherwise I go down, will begin, lived here, in which these are lines, very, very thin lines, thrust into relief the fragility of this thing, the fragility of the crafted object, barely held together like a piece of maritime floss. It also, the Rich's rhythm also renders the descent physically and emotionally. That's also the function of the thin lines, providing uh, thin lines that hold things together and keep our mind busy with the image of the ladder. Yeah, the ladder as a prime metaphor, an almost invisible thread, like a piece of maritime floss. And the ladder here is key, as I said. The thin ladder is again an allusion, a biblical allusion to Jacob's dream in Genesis 28, lines 10, or rather verses 10, 11, where there is a Jacob dreams of a ladder set up on the earth with the top reaching to heaven. And so ascending where the angels ascend and descend. So ascending and descending, the ladder as imported, as an allusion, imported by Rich in a poem, is a sign of a supple mind that is capable of ascending and descending. Uh, in fact, it teases the mind. It teases the mind with a supple ascending and descending with the dynamic possibilities of graceful connections, uh, reaches ascent to the bottom. It seems a paradox, but that's exactly what happens. She ascends to the bottom, as in the case of H. This creature involves solitude and self-defense. Solitude and self. Remember the knife. Remember the knife. Sorry. First, having read the book of myths, she's read the tradition. She loads the camera to document. She knows that no one will believe her if she utters criticism of the tradition. She needs proof. So she takes the camera, checks the edge of the knife blade. She's going to be in hostile territory. She's going to have to defend herself, to be aggressive if needs be, and then puts on the body armor of black rubber, disguises herself, or rather, goes down, explores the wreck in the name of everybody else, as everybody else. I am she, I am he. This is the stanza at the center of the screen. This is the place, and I am here, the mermaid with dark hair. Notice, the modulation. So she's first the body armor, then the insect-like creature crawling, then the mermaid. The mermaid with dark hair screams black. The merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck. The assumption that she as a group, a collectivity of others out there who recognize her descent and the need for the descent and the details of the descent. We circle silently about the wreck. We dive into the hold. I am she. I am he. Fantastic stanza break, whose drowned face, and then it blurs the stanza break blurs the line between the diver and the victims found, the damaged lives, with complete empathy and identification. And then further down, we are, I am, you are. By cowardice or courage, the one will find our way, etc. Recapping what we saw in this last part of our analysis of diving into the wreck, the fragile thing that is this text, that held together by a monometric rhythm I put on, etc. A thin line. We are made to see in front of us a thin line that holds things together, an invisible, almost invisible thread, like a piece of maritime floss, a thin ladder connecting heaven and earth that is inducing to supple movements of the mind, ascending and descending the dynamic possibilities of graceful connections. Remember the pearl, of great price, the pearl has also this graceful aura to it. The text is graceful, not an anti-theological something, but a graceful something. So in conclusion, I propose, because it's really a hypothesis I'm making, that HD and Rich combined are telling us something about the text. They help us take on question, what is the text? And in the readings that I've offered, the text is neither anti-theological, that is, they don't feel the need for a loud slamming of doors. Okay, it's reflective, brooding, withdrawal. Withdrawal can be indocility, I suggest. Someone who withdraws, who sits apart, that's a form of dissent. That's a form of dissent in dissent, form of indocility, a way of saying no, but not in a spectacular way. It's not an overrun. But we hear an affinity for a creaturely withdrawal. That is, it's as if talking about the text as a product of Homo faber, fact of human making, compelled us also to look at how other creatures make things. And we also notice the vulnerability, the precarity of this thing made, and of the maker, the mollusk, and Rich's creatures are, creatures endangered, on the defense, with hard tasks set for them. And as usual, you have the bibliography, the works cited at the end. I want to call your attention to Hélène Cixous, his French feminist thinker, and 3 steps on the ladder of writing. Yes, you notice the image of the ladder, but the fact that writing is associated with ladder in feminist writings, Rich and Cixous, must mean something. In this essay, this longer essay, Cixous talks about being called by the text. It's not we who decide which texts we read, but it's texts that call us. So she automatically projects the notion of the text as more than an object, more than that compact, highly theoretical object that you've heard in Roland Barthes' rendering of it. It's an object that has been crafted after Marxism, after structuralism, after Freudianism, and it is the object that we hold against all oppressive systems. It's a banner, as I said. Cixous turns another way. And again, I'm not interested in pitting men against women, male theorists against women writers, but it so happens that we hear a different sensibility. To be fair, I also want to call, if I have a few minutes before the end of the lecture, Rashni, how am I doing? Do I have 5 minutes? Still. I wait for Rashni's answer, but
Yeah,
Reference.
yeah, Meena, I'm here.
Okay.
So thank you so much for this wonderful
But
talk.
do
And
I have, yeah, can we end here, or do I have 5 minutes to make a final point?
yeah,
How are
yeah,
we
you
doing?
have time.
Okay, great,
Yes.
great. Because I was saying, uh, to be fair, we need to be fair. I have presented the Barth Derrida axis, this the overrun, the Barth's anti-theological banner, etc. To be fair, at a certain point, and here I need to go back, I point to a title and then I go back to the slide. At a certain point, Derrida realized the limits of that notion of text. Text as overrun, text as stepping into unlimited space. And guess what? Allow me to go back to those 3 slides that I had to skip. Guess what? He realized the limits of that notion of the text. The risk was, in fact, the major limit was the risk of replacing one. If the text is a rebellion against first principles, as Barth said, author, God, well, there is the risk of replacing that repudiated first principle with another first principle. In fact, the axis, Barth Derrida replaced the God principle with the principle of unreadability, obscurity at all costs, the celebration of obscurity. In the attempt, in the effort, and in the desire of challenging the boundaries of meaning, the risk is precisely to erect new totems, right? New theological authorities, so to speak. In this case, unreadability, the fact that the text is defended as completely separate from communication. So, sensing this limit, Derrida, in a wonderful text called Che cos'è la poesia? What is poetry? And the title is in Italian because this is a text that he wrote in response to an Italian journal who asked him to precisely respond to the question, reply to the question, che cos'è la poesia? What is poetry? In this marvelous text, he posits the text as poem. So, and the poem text as an animal on the autoroute rolled up in a bowl. The poem text as a creature, a vulnerable creature exposed to danger, in withdrawal, and in purposive self-defense. It's like Harrison, he compares the creature to that animal called in Italian istrice, in French Harrison, in English hedgehog, the humble hedgehog. When in danger, the hedgehog, rolls up, withdraws, becomes self-enclosed. But in this text, Derrida opens to an alternative view of the text. The text is no longer a concern about edges, about the overrun, about having no boundaries, about crossing boundaries, this reclaiming this freedom in unlimited space. When considered from the point of view of poetry, the text even not only is an animal but speaks in Derrida's very experimental text. The poem speaks and the text speaks, the text poem speaks, and it says, I am a dictation, pronounces poetry. Learn me by heart, copy me down, guard me, keep me, look out for me, look at me, dictation right before your eyes. Wake, trail of light, photograph of the feasting morning. Text speaks, and I am a dictation. Learn me by heart, copy me down. It's as if it contained that nugget of truth that we are back to Benjamin and HD together combined. Remember, the purpose of these lectures is also to build an inside vocabulary. Where we are back to Benjamin and HD combined, okay, the self-enclosed text, the taciturn text that speaks addressing its potential, reader withdrawn, but addressing its potential reader to be protected, a truth that is embedded, intimately intertwined with the concrete details of the text, that is, that asks to stay alive. The liveliness of text, the truth embedded in the details that is passed on to the readers. And we are also back to HD, okay, guard me, okay, the text that is frail. The Moloch technician creates something that is constantly beset by dangers. Now, allow me to. What Derrida proposes here, I wish to propose, is the text, the vocative text, the text that addresses its readers, because it encrypts. This is no longer about crossing boundaries in full daylight, unlimited space. This is about secrets. This is about something that the text, a pearl of great price, that the text holds, that is encrypted, and it's addressed in a vocative mode to a reader. It calls out to a you. A writing in a cause that vehicles a call. It's totally different view of the text in this essay by Derrida. 1988. The overrun, remember, was the end, late 70s. And this view of the vocative text is close to Alain Sixous's view of the text. I mentioned Alain Sixous. Allow me to end with a quote from Sixous. When choosing a text I'm called, I obey the call. Notice, obey the call. Sixous is not into debunking, rebelling, knocking down the author God, etc. I obey the call of certain texts, or I am rejected by others. I am rejected by others. The texts that call me have different voices, but they all have one voice in common. They all have, with their differences, certain music I'm attuned to. And that's the secret. Explicitly mentions the secret, where Derrida was too shy maybe to talk about the secret. Sixous mentions the secret, that is this, remember, the creature, the animal, folded onto itself. The poem text like this vulnerable animal holding something that asks to be protected. I think I would like to end here. As we did earlier on, I welcome comments, notes, questions, curiosities, clarification points, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Meena, for that wonderful talk. And now we invite the participants for their questions. If they have something to ask, they can step forward. I was also looking at the beautiful, interconnectedness of identity and politics between Adrienne Rich and HD. How would you look at that, Meena, and your views on it? How do you see the interconnectedness between the two?
Thank you. That's a very inviting question and prompt. Thank you for soliciting that. There are important connections between HD and Rich. I would say that HD nurtured Rich's formation as a poet and as a critic. The major element of the interconnectedness is the way in which Adrienne Rich, at a certain point in her life after encountering feminism in the early 70s, started to craft her poetry according to her predecessor, HD. So HD is a major protagonist of modernism, and she has been celebrated as an imagist. She, I would say, embodied the two main tenets of modernism: make it new, and the search for a different kind of writing that would be attuned to the sensibility of the present, that would break with the pentameter, with set structures and set forms, and be open to the varieties of sensibilities of the present. Now, Rich studied HD's language. In fact, Susan Gruber's article came out, I think, in the 80s, certainly after diving into rec, but that article is illuminating in terms of finding, uh, of deepening the study of this interconnectedness. So at the technical level, the use of stringent images of line breaks, the use of the intellectual use, I would like to say, of line breaks to create a bridge with the reader. Both in HD and in Rich, we have reflective scenarios that, there is the aesthetic object, but the aesthetic side becomes a site of thought. So the reader is invited not only to enjoy, but to reflect. In fact, the enjoyment of the aesthetic object, which we associate, with poetry, especially lyric poetry, goes hand in hand, is inseparable from reflection for thought. In both diving into rec and poem form, we have this scenario that encourages the reader to reflect and guides the reader via line breaks, the use of line breaks, and jammed lines. So technical level. The other is at the level of themes, the exploration of the wreck. It's the descent, the analysis, the critique. I would like to say, if descent is a form of critique, the analysis and critique, a critical attitude toward not only their society, but the symbolic pinpoints the symbolic web, the symbolic texture that upholds society. So the fact that social relations, the value of people, is decided by hidden symbolic structures and the desire to unveil those structures, but also to move beyond them. It's not entirely what they have in common is ultimately the desire to move beyond this structure.
Thank you so much. I see a question in the chat box,
Yes, let me
which
look.
prompts me to ask this to you.
Yeah.
Who is HD here? So, I mean, why was it that with some intention she chose to use her initials instead of a full name?
Oh, interesting. That's a very interesting question. Thank you. Very interesting question, and I think since we're speaking of women writers, very apropos. This is a name that was given to her by Ezra. HD Hilda Doolittle, and she has because writers continue living with us, this nice homey American name. Pound changed it to make it more glamorous. Pound launched the images movement by championing the poetry of HD. Pound discovered, quote unquote, HD in the sense that HD shared her poetry with Pound, and Pound realized immediately that she was highly original. It's a bit like if you like Western painting, for example, Cézanne. You look at Cézanne. Cézanne was convinced that he had a defect in his eyes, but yet that was his genius, the way he painted things. The same happened to HD. She, did not think of herself consciously as a craftsman, as a poet. Pound launched her and asked her to sign herself HD, and she went on. signing herself HD. It's an interesting anecdote. It's not just a superficial anecdote. It says a lot about women writers, about modernist women writers who needed, first of all, to be supported by an established network, usually led by men, Pound and Eliot. As much as we love them, there is also the gender factor must be considered. So she continued to use those initials. Undoubtedly, they project an aura of androgyny, and they detract. I mean, they distract us from uh, attaching the writing to maybe a stereotypical image that we might form of the woman. So maybe the choice of HD. The problem is, why did HD choose to go along with Pound's decision about her name? I think she did so because it could protect her writing from stereotypical ways of reading by critics of the time.
And was she associated with the Bloomsbury group of writers?
Uh, I mean, uh, she knew about them. I would not consider her a Bloomsbury insider, but inevitably she knew them, as did her first husband, Richard Aldington. Yes, they were connected. She knew about them.
Okay, fantastic.
Speaking of Bloomsbury, if I may, this is interject this informal, this impromptu. I just a few nights ago I watched again because I was thinking about Bloomsbury modern Islam. I watched again this magnificent movie about Bloomsbury Carrington. It's a 1995 movie about Bloomsbury and the avant-garde, about the different coteries and how even those coteries within themselves were formed, were very diverse. I mean, the individuals were very diverse. So yes, HD knew many of the people whom we associate with Bloomsbury, although I don't think she would have liked to be part of a movement, except that she is known as a leading imagist, thanks to Pound.
Thank you so much for that insightful lecture, Meena. And now we can see some comments.
HD often reclaims. I'm looking. Okay, thank you for such one. Thank you so much for your appreciation. Yes, of course, the PowerPoint will be made available to you. In fact, Rashni, I need to send you the final versions of the PowerPoint right after our the lecture ends. So HD often reclaims mythological figures like Helen, Eurydice, and to explore female identity. Rich too engages with mythology but rewrites it through a feminist lens. Given that both poets resist traditional portrayals of femininity, so how do they use creaturely or animalistic imagery to challenge gender norms? Yes, in fact, this is a very good point. Very attuned to the lecture. I do think that in diving into the wreck, Rich is using the ambiguous human figure, female, man, androgynous, human, the black rubber, the mask and the comparison to the insect suggests, a blurring of the boundaries. These moments when the boundaries of human identity are blurred are in themselves a way of challenging gender norms. Because it is true that both HD and Rich have been HD has been reclaimed by the feminist movement, both in the US, the historical feminist movement, second wave in the US and in Europe, while HD was a prime spokeswoman for the feminist movement. And while at first the feminist movement aim was thought to be, was seen to be gender equality, that's not the entire story. Both HD and Rich especially, saw feminism as a more ethical view of the world. So feminism is about a new ethos, a new ethos. So it's about challenging gender norms, but also about, while challenging gender norms, with the literary devices that you're rightly pointing to, while challenging gender norms, also imagining different humanization, different strategies, different way of humanization are more welcoming, more inclusive. Feminism has that uh, expansive dimension. I don't know if I answered the question, but yes, I mean, staging the creature, staging the mollusk, staging the androgynous creature, androgynous human, non-human creature, is a way of a formal way of challenging, a moment of the text when the text challenges gender norms, trying to escape them, reflective indocility. I'm curious to know why you chose to understand what is text through those two. Thank you. This is a core question you're asking. Thank you. I was in my inquiry about the text. I realized, first of all, that the notion of the text had been handled by post-structuralism mainly. That the importance of the text turned concept became obvious to us, especially with post-structuralism. And by post-structuralism, I mean all that line of thought after after language as studied, for example, with Saussure, turned, we turned from a view of language as a system to a view of language as discourse. This is what triggered post-structuralism. Barthes and Derrida are, I would classify them, perhaps reductively, but for the sake of answering your question, post-structuralist. So I realized that. So I started asking myself, but isn't there a theory of the text in modernism as well? I mean, we study modernism. I, in particular, am interested in linking modernism and contemporary critical thought. I started wondering about that, and I realized that in modernism and in contemporary literature that feels the legacy of modernism, we have a number of writers who are at the same time creative writers and theorists, HD and Rich being two of them, poets and critics at the same time. So challenging boundaries, I started wondering whether, there is such a thing as meta poetry. Poetry speaks about itself. It's nothing new. But I started wondering about Rich and HD and what they had said about the text. And I was I was curious to see whether their poems sent out messages about the text. And then I read I reread, because I have read it a long time ago without paying attention to these issues. I read Gubar's essay on HD, and there Gubar talks about a theory of the text. And so I just built on this. I started, but there's a reason why I chose this particular two authors and this particular poems, because they present reflection as a movement downward. And as you will hear in the lectures that follow, for some critics and thinkers, the path toward truth is actually a path downward. not upward. And here, in diving into the wreck end, which is a poem I love. I mean, it's the background to my life essay. I mean, the soundtrack, the poetic track of my life as a critic. Both in diving into wreck and in poem 4, we have two creatures intent on descending as a form of revelation. So these are the reasons. I'm just curious to know if there are any other poems by HD where we can read it as we should see a text growing, becoming, and I would
Yeah.
say, I would say the
Yeah,
entire
Meena, we can.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you. The entire the walls do not fall. I would go there, and then I would go to a text called Hermetic Definition by HD. It's an essay, Hermetic Definition. Well, it's a combination of essays and poetry. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Meena.